That means I'm bringing you truth. I'm Aust NeferKa, and I'm here with the lovely Mama Regina Jennings. First and foremost, Mama Regina, do I have your permission to speak?
Absolutely.
Give thanks. So, welcome to the Professor and Priestess. This is our talk show that we're doing every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time live. So, even if you're catching the raw play, then you can feel free to engage in the comments. But if you are here with us live, welcome. Please feel free to engage with us in the chat and we will answer any questions that you might have as we move through the show. So, if you are here with us live, welcome. Please let us know where you're tuning in from and just send us any questions that you have. Today, our episode is going to be all about how the natural world is really under attack. And although we know that it is the winning team, the winning side to be on, there are very significant aspects of synthetic and artificial paradigms that many of us are embracing that we may not know are damaging our connection and the natural world, our ecosystem to begin with. So, as we're continuing in our series, it's all about this season is all about how revolution is the only solution. Dr. Regina Jennings is an original Black Panther. She's also a mother, an author. Mama Regina, can you actually introduce yourself briefly for those who might be here for the first time and didn't watch our introduction episode?
Well, sure. I am an original Black Panther from well, I served in Oakland, California, but I was raised in Philadelphia, in South Philly, as a matter of fact, on a small street called Annan Street. And I lived with my grandmother, my aunts, my uncles, my sisters in this really little small house during the greatest segregation period in the 1950s going into the 60s. So I have that background of Black community cohesion. We were Negroes when I was a child, and I never liked that term, and I never knew why, but I never liked, being a Negro. But that's what we were. But on this block, with all of these lovely Black people, I mean, we had our own community. My grandmother would even take me up to Point Breeze Avenue, and there was a chicken store. And we would go into the store, and she'd actually pick out a chicken, clucking and everything, feathers and everything, flying and everything. And she'd take that sucker home. And I saw her snap his neck. I almost fainted. Uh, and I swore in my young self, I can't eat him, because I had grown kind of affectionate with the chicken because we were carrying him home, and I got to hear him cluck and, whatever the chickens do. So by the time we got home, see, the first time we did this, I didn't know what was going to happen. That's how little I was, but I was with my beloved grandmother whom I adored, and she adored me, although, she never talked that much, and I didn't talk that much either, but I knew I was loved, right? When we got home and she snapped that chicken's neck, I swore, now, not in these words, I'm talking, I was about 4, maybe 5 years old, that I was going to be a vegetarian. I was not going to eat my friend the chicken. That, of course, was until she cooked that sucker. And I smelled him. And I was hungry. And all my family was around, and everybody was just loving on that chicken. So I started eating on him too. But I bring that up because of the topic that Sister Neff, the good Sister Priestess Neff, wants to interrogate during our time together tonight, and that's about the natural land and the natural order and natural cycles, you see. And so the land issue, because my grandmother owned her own house, and my family, we don't even know, and I'm investigating it now, how she got this house. My grandmother was a cleaning woman. You dig? But she was also smart enough to have a side hustle. All right. So, she ran a speakeasy. She was selling, illegal alcohol during, Al Capone's days and all those sorts of things. And so she knew how to balance it. And she worked in a restaurant. My grandmother had 9 children. They had to be fed. Okay. My grandfather's, I don't know where them brothers were, but nevertheless, she had 9 kids to feed. So she had several different hustles around food and also around buying properties in Philadelphia. So that's how I grew up. How I ended up in Oakland, California was because I was absolutely tired of seeing police abuse. I didn't know quite how to deal with it. I marched with Martin Luther King once. I was a teenager by then. And I knew I wasn't going to continue to do that. Nothing so much against King, but I was not going to be spit on. That was just not who I was. So when I saw Huey and Bobby talk their talk and do their thing, I was like, well, I need to go help those brothers. Don't ask me what I thought I was going to do, but I jumped a late plane from Philadelphia to Oakland, California to join the Black Panther Party for self-defense. In that experience, I learned to love books, study, exercise, and to love Black people even more, maybe, than I loved my own self. So it became very natural to me, especially after being a part of the free breakfast for school children program that, for the most part, Bobby put together to embrace those wonderful children and their parents every morning like that. I mean, that it overwhelmed me to the point that later years, I decided that I wanted to go to college and become a professor. Actually, there was a young sister, who told me that I was smart because I had never thought that I was. And she was already in the university here in Temple University in Philadelphia. And she took me to the college, and the rest is history. So that's who I am. I am a Malcolm X scholar. I am a Black resistance scholar. And what I want to do, that Neff has allowed me to do, is just to share my worldview with our listeners.
Rashay, yes, give thanks. And you mentioned food several times, because really when we're talking about returning back to nature, our connection to nature, I think the most intimate way that we connect with nature is through our nourishment, is literally the sustenance of the planet that sustains life, human life. And it's it's alarming to me, the values that are now being embraced and the disconnect from the planet because of the convenience of being able to go to restaurants and order food online and
It's
really
true.
not be connected at all to the food, never mind the land itself and how these things are produced on the land. So we're going to get into that. I do want to shout out our brothers that are here with us live. Shout out to Mujasi. Welcome. Glad you're in the house. And everyone else who's in, feel free to engage with us in the chat. Our brother Jadorian, welcome. Honor and respect to you too, brother. I really appreciate you being here with us. So, as you're here for this
Well, Neff,
conversation,
I just want to say this, Neff, real quick. I
yeah,
love that the brothers are here because
yeah,
I
the
love
brother,
the brothers.
yeah,
I
the
mean,
brother.
I really want to say that because just a couple of days ago, I have really good girlfriends. I love them very much. And one of them wanted to have a meeting because she adopts throwaway Black children. And so she needed to raise some money so that she could do some things for them. But I had to tell her, I said, and she was calling all of our girlfriends, all of these female people that she knew, right? And I was like, are you going to call any brothers? And she was like, well, yeah, I guess. I said, well, please, I'm sick of going to meetings where I only see women. I want to see some men. And, everybody thought that was funny, although I, I wasn't trying to make a joke, but I really, to bring balance that you always talk about, Neff, I think that I'm really feeling that, you see. Now, there are times to be with my sisters, absolutely. But there are also, especially in these times, to let brothers know, you know, that we love you, we care for you, we're glad you're here. And we also recognize the murderous tendencies of the demonic people that be, okay? They have it out for you. For me too, but they really have it out for you.
Mm. Yeah, and then Brother Mujasi said he loves Black Resistance Scholar. Yeah. So I'm thankful that our brothers are here. Shout out to anyone else who's here with us as well. Please feel free to tap in during the chat. That's the great thing about being here with us live. Now, if you didn't watch the previous episode we did, it's called The Balance of the Sexes. So that's what Mama Regina was definitely referencing, because we've been going through the first episode. We did an introduction and we were talking about how Tehuti Ma'at as a revolutionary ideology is built on the foundation of the 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party for self-defense, and a critical analysis of that and revolving that for the moment that we're in right now. And in addition to that, we're also built on the foundation of spiritual warriorship, which is really about us taking the higher ground and taking our African-centered, cosmic worldview and using that as our guide and drive to recognize the cycles of time that we're moving through, to recognize our ancestral prophecies and the things that we carved into stone, and how we apply that knowledge and that wisdom to our lives right now, because we are on a soul journey, right? Our collective soul, but each of us as individuals as well. So we're here on a journey to grow and develop. And the situation that we find ourselves in the state of warfare that we are in, is spiritual. It is psychological, it is biological, it is physical in so many ways. So it's multidimensional. And because of that, we start at the higher ground, which is spiritual. And it's also our most powerful position to take as African people. So that spiritual ground is really essential, because everything starts in spirit and takes form. So we've been going into that, and we're starting to go through our 11 pillar platform that is inspired by that. It's interesting because on Instagram, I did see a video clip of Huey P. Newton himself talking about how the 10-point platform was actually inspired by the Nation of Islam, which
That's
I
right.
did not know before.
Oh,
Yeah, I did not know that.
okay.
So that was really great for me to like get even more context. And I did go deeper into some of the last interviews that Huey did. And that was a really beautiful connection again with his spirit. And yeah, just affirming the path that we're on right now. So we define revolution as healing, liberation, restoration, elevation, and expansion. And those are what we consider to be the five forces that built on the spiritual warrior, five forces that are universal. So we're looking at the warfare that we're in right now, the state of war that we're in right now, and how do we consciously direct our energy to successfully create liberation within our lifetime. So when we talked about the balance of the sexes, that was in the context of pillar one, which is Ma'at, which is about balance, but it's also about truth, about creating justice. And one of the greatest institution, or the main institution that we have, is the family, and how the family is being attacked by the imbalance of the sexes and this gender war that is trying to be, projected out into the collective. So we touched on that. And then today we're touching on pillar two, which is nature, or netter, as I like to say, because when we remove the vowels and we just deal with that ntr, nter, some people say netter, um, because it was actually seen to be more of a clicking sound, according to one of my elders, Baba Heru at the Shrine of Ptah, that it was more of a clicking sound, that nter. And essentially that's returning us back to our original vibration. So a lot of us use the term God. And even when it comes to ancient Kemetic, or what some people may know as ancient Egyptian, science, some people look at it in a religious context based on the way they've been indoctrinated into it. And they think that the forces of nature that are described are actually gods and goddesses. And that concept of a divinity externalized is very problematic for us because we're constantly looking for this savior outside of us. And instead of seeing the divinity that is within us and how we channel that divine force in order to create in this world. So there's an accountability that we have to have. And because many of us have been indoctrinated into Western religions, that although our African culture is the root of all the Western religions, because we touched on that last time as well, because we talked about Dr. Ben and his work, Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, and the work. He has many books, but one of the books that I mentioned in the last session was the African origins of the major Western religions. Now, just because they were built on that foundation, the way that they were corrupted are very essential because we also moved into a patriarchal expression of these original ideas and systems. So I like to bring us back to that original vibration, NaTuRal, because I feel that word and vibration, and we all know that the whole universe is based on vibration, right? This material world, literally our physical reality, is the basis of vibration. The colors that we see are based on the vibrations that we see. So vibration is fundamental. So we have to really stake claim to our vibrational power and how we create our reality with our words. And I feel that when we're using that word, we are conjuring and empowering a certain entity, right? A certain deity that is patriarchal. And I feel that it's not really speaking to the totality of divinity because it is like depicting God as a man. And that's the fundamental, premise of a lot of these religions. So I think it's important for us to look at NaTuRal as the totality of divinity. There is no gender. There is no. It's not even. It's not even masculine or feminine. It's whole. It's the total of divinity. And then the reason why I say that in the context of us talking about this pillar is because our connection to the natural world is our connection to divinity. This entire experience in our whole ecosystem is a divine experience. So in order for us to be free, we have to be in our original nature. And unfortunately, a lot of us, because we've grown up within this construct that's been imposed on us, we're very disconnected from what our original nature would even be. So I'm wondering, Mama Regina, if you could speak on, I know you spoke earlier about just that experience seeing the chicken and your mother killed the chicken. And then, I'm sure that was probably one of your earlier experiences of, seeing how connected we are to nature. But some people, they only get chicken when they go into the supermarket and it's in plastic wrapped up, probably injected with tons of hormones and synthetic chemicals, and probably fed animal feed that is GMO and also sprayed with herbicides and pesticides and insecticides, and literally devouring their bodies and their biochemistry. So within that reality, your mother killing a chicken was probably as natural as it could get. So in that case, we're way far removed from that experience.
We definitely are. And it was my grandmother. My mother would never kill a chicken. She'd eat it, but she wouldn't kill it. But what's interesting, I'm glad you even mentioned her. My mother worked in a hot dog factory. Okay. My grandmother was a cleaning woman. My mother worked in a hot dog factory, and she would never eat a hot dog. My mother never ate a hot dog her entire life. And when my aunt, because she was right there in the same little house with us, she would get hot dogs. You know how people have hot dogs at parties and, just on a Saturday or something like that. my mother permitted me and my sisters to eat a hot dog. And I loved hot dogs so much. I was like, are you sure you don't want this? And she said, I've seen how they're made. I could never eat that. She said, I won't stop you all, because it was a big treat for us to, have a hot dog on a nice little roll and all that. But she would never eat a hot dog because she saw how they were made. Now, this country hates the land. This is why they stripped the land in Europe before they built ships to go to Africa and get us and bring us back here. Uh,
You mean they
Europe, it's
the land of the free?
hey. So the Europeans, they're running out of wood. They lived in cold climates, and beauty and greenery were sparse and this sort of thing. And they did not have a kind of relationship with the land that Africans had, because Africa was so lush. I'm talking about, the early centuries, and it still is. I mean, it still has a lot of lushness and minerals going on. But during the time of our pre-enslavement and enslavement, Europeans, they stripped us from our land, brought us here, and this was after they had murdered as many red men and women as they possibly could, raped them, and they do what Europeans do, introduced alcohol and this sort of thing, and conducted massive killing of the buffalo, which of course was like a staple, not like, it was the staple of many of the red nations' livelihood. I mean, they made their houses out of buffalo. They made their clothes out of buffalo skin. They made their jewelry out of buffalo teeth. Buffalo meant everything to them. And because white folks wanted this land, they killed as many buffalo as they could. Okay?
Yes,
They even scorched the land. They set the land on fire. Okay? So this is what they did with the natural world. So fast forward to where we are now. Absolutely. They took the reality out of nature. It's more convenient to go to a supermarket. This is true. It is convenient. I understand that. But understand that when you pick up that, I'll stay with the chicken, okay? When you pick up that packaged chicken, you're not remembering that that chicken was alive and pecking and kicking and laying eggs and doing all sorts of things that chickens like to do. You know, in fact, you're removed for the killing that I saw as a child. You're removed from that. So therefore, you don't really care about that chicken except for how it's going to satisfy your palate. Okay. How you're going to feel good once you fry it or bake it or whatever. That's all you think about. And I was even talking to, I've taught at summer camps for elementary school children. And this is recent years. They would normally say, if I asked a question about, well, where do you think a chicken comes from? The supermarket. Yeah, they had no relationship to an animal of any kind, okay, that they ingest. No relationship at all. So what we're doing and what we're saying here today is exceedingly important, because America is an artificiality. It is America that created the first bomb. Now, they discovered the atom, and instead of looking at what atoms could produce that would bring us closer to an energy that's close to God, they said, oh gosh, we could blow up things. They like to kill. And if you don't believe me, just think about the Ukraine war that we're in right now. Biden doesn't want a peace treaty, not at all. He's happy to sell and give more weapons, give more weapons, give more weapons, give more weapons. This is what they do. Remember, we had just gotten out of Afghanistan. You see, they were there for 20, years. They stole all of the Afghanis' wealth. They're still holding their wealth in United States banks. So this is the society that we are growing up in, and especially our children are growing up in, which then relates to the artificiality of life that Neff was talking about. Our children, see, they can't come after me. All right. I mean, I know the deal, but they can absolutely influence our young ones. And one of the jobs that we have got to bring our youth back to their senses. Okay. And this is why it's important to heal, because many of us are crazy. I know I've been crazy over the decades. Absolutely. Every Black person in America has some degree of insanity. How the hell can you live in this kind of artificiality, individualism, no God, you could be whatever gender you want to be, I mean, what is this? So it hasn't been good for us as a people. And what I want to do while I am on earth is to bring our people back to a more normalized human kind of thinking and doing. The last thing I'm gonna say on this too is this. I have a friend like Neff who is a farmer, and she was not always a farmer. Lord have mercy. Her exploits were just, what can I tell you? I won't. But the point is this: she is now a farmer, and I get my foods from her for free, of course, very often. But this is the point. She had to go 360 degrees around the world, literally, to come to the conclusion that she needed to grow her own food for herself, her family, for other Black people who need it. And I think that that kind of thing is what we need today to impress upon our youth.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that. One, about the extractive nature and the anti nature of the European culture, which American culture is European culture. Um, but also the fact that our children are very disconnected. Many of us are disconnected. But what I want to lay foundationally is to make sure that we are clear on the truth of the current situation within nature on our planet. Our planet is abundant. That's a fact, right? So the artificial scarcity and the scarcity mindset that capitalism is based on, so that it's constantly extracting, but it's also constantly convincing people of lack in order to take power over people, economic power, right? Because when we're talking about economics, we're talking about food, clothing, shelter, security, energy. We're talking about the things that we actually need. We're talking about the resources, or I like to say raw sources of the planet, right? Because Ra is the solar principle. So we're talking about everything that's energized and electrified by the sun. We are solar powered people. And when it comes to our original nature, when it comes to the nature of the planet, this is a solar powered planet. So that disconnect from nature, I think, is very clear that when we have a population of people on the planet who have an issue with literally processing the sun and literally don't have the carbon compound to the extent what they call the melanin to process the sun, and that resentment, right? And it's so deep that I'm not saying this is something that people are conscious of, right? They're not conscious that they hate the sun. It's just what's expressed in that nature of extracting and going against nature. Now, that's fundamental. Now we're dealing with that reality. We have this vindictive energy that's now like constantly wreaking havoc on the planet. And we've just gone through this 500-year period of exploitation, of imperialism. We're still in this construct. And according to Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, which I think is very important to turn to revolutionary psychiatry, or psychology. And I love how she expresses that most of us are insane. We're in a state of insanity if we are not dealing with the reality of the world that we're in right now. So everyone who's acting like everything is fine is insane. Period. We have to look at the world, at the situation and the reality of the situation for what it is. Some people can even have that what's called toxic positivity, where it's like, no, I only want to declare what I want to see. And it's like, no, we have to deal with reality, and we can still have a vision for a restored future. But that's the beauty of the planet. It is abundant and it is restorative. It is regenerative by nature. So I will, a little deeper into the conversation, go into some of our ancient sacred science and our mythologies about the planet itself, because it's been completely inverted in terms of the European. They literally flipped it upside down. So I think it's very important for us to root ourselves in our own cultural orientation, quite literally agricultural orientation, because our ancient tradition was rooted in agriculture, and the basis of civilization is rooted in agriculture. So that's why to this day I tell people that farming is right there next to giving birth as one of the most revolutionary acts that we can do on the planet right now. It's essential. If we're talking revolution and we're not talking about food, we're not serious, because how are you going to feed the people? That's fundamental. If you cannot feed the people, you cannot sustain revolution in a real deal like context, in terms of a militarized approach to actually taking power of our own people. So we have to be able to feed our people. We have to be able to create the institutions that we need. And the food, a food network, is essential to that. So when you mentioned the food, the Breakfast for Children program, that's what inspired our Organic Food for the People mission, because our goal is to have a sovereign food system, because we have to be able to control our ability to feed ourselves and feed people. So we wanted to build on that idea, but not feed people toxic, poisonous food. We wanted to find a way to not only feed people healthy, organically grown food, but also teach people the skills to be able to grow their own food, teach people how to utilize that food, cook that food, and be able to nourish themselves, because that is the front lines right now, is in our bodies. That's what we have to realize. Someone might not be putting a gun to your head to make you go and buy that Heinz ketchup or Burger King or whatever it may be, right? You're battling that war within. So that's why it's essential for us to go into the energetics of it, because it's not a black and white thing. It's an artificial versus natural thing. And I got a lot of clarity on that as I started to observe what was actually going on, because energetically, we're not dealing with the fundamental issue, which is what aspects of us are in contradiction with nature. What choices are we making that are in contradiction to nature? And how can we be accountable to that? Because I think a lot of conversations right now about the artificial paradigms that are created, particularly the internet, it's not coming from an accountable place. If you start criticizing or questioning, even, people want to act like, oh, so you want us to go back into the Stone Age. And it's like, no, we can't have the imagination and the creativity and the audacity to see a way to use modern technology, or to revolve modern technology out of a way of being extractive and dangerous and destructive? Do we have to exploit children in the Congo in order to have these devices? Do we have to have people slaving in factories making these devices? Do we have to have a paradigm where we don't even benefit from that at all? No. So I just think there's a way that we have to approach the conversation which makes us more accountable and just able to even have the conversation, because a lot of people within the space of, I just feel like, honestly, there aren't really that many people having these revolutionary militant dialogues about these things to begin with. So I feel like just having the conversation and putting this narrative on the forefront is essential, because right now you just have people saying AI is the future and Web3, and it's all of the things that are pulling us away from nature, pulling us away from the land, pulling us away from our own power, and convincing us to buy into another lie that pulls us out of ourselves and out of our actual power. So I think that the body is one of the main ways that we root ourselves in nature and our divinity, right? This is our gift. So again, coming back to nature and the origins of the word nature and all these different languages being neter, which is our word for divinity, for the totality of divine energy, and how we have to see that within ourselves. So I feel one of the main ways that we have to connect with nature is really through our breath. It was interesting that we had an attack on our respiratory system. I did not take that lightly. And it's also interesting that most of us don't even know how to breathe properly. We're suffering through anxiety. We have a lot of mental health issues. We have a lot of emotional health issues, a lot of which could simply be healed by connecting with our breath, by actually deepening our breath, slowing down our central nervous system, returning to our original nature, because we're constantly now being bombarded with all of this external stimuli, these blue lights, these screens, even just the artificial light in general. Our circadian rhythm is completely off kilter. So these are all aspects of fundamental nature that we need to come into equilibrium with in order to be able to sustain revolution. So the natural world has a lot to offer us as far as solutions, as far as methods and systems that we can use. And for Tehuti Ma'at, most of our systems are all built on natural models. So we look at cycles of time. Everything that we do is based on literally on the revolution of our planet around the sun, looking at the expansion of that coming out of the equinox periods where we have equal day and night, and then rising and extending the daylight into until we have our solstice in the summer with the longest day, going back into equilibrium, equal day and night, another equinox, and then going into the winter solstice where we have the longest night and the shortest day. So that cyclical nature is really essential for us to really be in tune with the world, because if we don't recognize that everything moves in cycles, and we don't realize that sometimes we have to just stop, sometimes we have to just rest, we can't always be going. We're not machines. That is what's creating the weakness, right? Especially when it comes to our masculine energy, because that overaction, overactivity, constant productivity is weakening us. It's weakening our divine feminine side, which is the intuitive side. So we can't even connect to our instinct and our intuitive intelligence because we're so depleted, and we can't even allow ourselves to come into a state of rest. And there's a movement now as well that's like kind of in alignment with the things that we're doing, called rest is resistance. And I really resonate with that, because I really think that in the world that we're in right now, if we don't allow ourselves to come to a point of rest in order to process and deal with everything that's surrounding us and the reality that we're in, we're not going to be able to build on anything. We're just going to keep looping around and engaging in the system as it stands, instead of pulling back, right? Because retreat is different than defeat, right? We're we're just getting slaughtered. But if we could actually pull back and actually regroup and analyze and assess and allow ourselves to heal and process before we move forward, then we can move forward with strength, with intelligence, with strategy. And I think that that's very important for us on a personal note and on a collective note. So I don't know if
I just wanted to add to what you were just saying, because it's so important. God, it's so important. I just wanted to say this: where we are now is by design. When in the 1960s, we were tearing this country apart deliberately. I mean, I told the story about Jonathan Jackson and his big brother George. There were just daring kinds of revolutionary movements that people were making. Okay, that's the 60s. But I also want to harken back to the 40s and the 30s with Marcus Garvey. And Elijah Muhammad was a Garveyite. You see, so every generation builds upon the previous one, which even what you are doing now, Neff, is building upon, and you say it outright, the 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party. That's the way it's supposed to go, right? Well, our enemies who control this country, and by the way, you know Bill Gates wants to block out the sun. Look it up on
Yes.
the
Well,
internet, folks who are listening. Now, can you imagine that? I'm not even going there with that unhuman human. The point that I want to make is where we are now, the artificiality of where we are now is by design. Absolutely. They were not going to have a revolution that continued to help Black people to be empowered. That was just not going to happen. Okay, because even the Honorable Elijah Muhammad talked about, or wrote a book about what to eat. What's it called? I'm messing up the title, but it has to do with our eating habits. And we all know that the Muslims said no pork. I mean, that's a beginning. That is a beginning to look at, well, why no pork? You know, and to figure that out right up to today, where we know well, many of us know we should eat more holistically. Okay. But the main point that I want to share with folk listening to us is that this moment in time that we're in, it was by design. Even buildings have changed. The economics of this country has changed. In the 1950s, sisters didn't always have to work if they had a husband. The husband went out and worked and brought the food back home. All right. All of these sisters that are on welfare, and I'm not knocking you. I was on welfare. Absolutely. I was on welfare and I was doing all kinds of outlaw activity as well so that I could take care of myself during a period when I needed to take care of myself, my children, and other throwaway children that, were in my care. So I'm saying that the economics changed to the point where now both parents need to work to have a decent living for their family, you see. And the paychecks of people today, they haven't risen to meet the demands, the price demands of the products that we need. So what happens, it's like what Neff was talking about. We're so inundated with, okay, you have to work. All right, that's noble. By the time you get home, you are stressed out. Okay. And if you're a woman, you got to make dinner. Okay. And you might have children. All right. So then you got to help with the homework. So what is left of any kind of personal time, any kind of meditative time, even any kind of innovative thinking time, and I'm gonna harken back to the Black Panther Party, Bobby and Huey, when they were deciding, and I do mean deciding, not they hadn't decided, but deciding, we must create a group that can go directly after the police, not in a hostile way, will learn the law, okay, will stand a certain distance away from them as they arrest somebody Black. When they made that decision, they spent 2 nights in Bobby's office, his West Oakland office, where he was a counselor for young teens that were kind of delinquent. It didn't just happen. They decided that this was something that they should create that would aid in, at that time, the revolution of Black people. All right. Now, Bobby had a wife and a child. Okay. So he had to explain to his wife, but she was also an activist, what he was going to do with some of the money that he was bringing home to her and his firstborn child. She had the good sense to support her man, right? Because his money then had to be split between his actual family and getting an office, the first office for the Black Panther Party for self-defense. So it was that kind of unity and camaraderie that we had in the 60s and 70s, that the demonic people that really controlled this country, that loved death, killing, and vampirism, they had to stop that. So what they did then was to put before us these black images, these so-called black powerful people, so we can get an image of what we think prosperity is, right? And then you create a whole new music. I have nothing against rap, nothing, nothing. So don't hate on me. But you give these videos of rappers with the gold and the bling and the big car. What the, really? Okay. So what they were doing though was then influencing, like I said before, the younger generation to think, oh, yeah, that's what I should have that. Now if you could sing, if you could rap, that's fine. But everybody is not a good rapper or a good singer or a good ball player. So none of the intellectualism, because see, to be a Panther, you had to study. I read more books. I listened to poetry. I mean, Panthers would even recite poetry in meetings. It was wonderful. All right. But to be a rapper, notice that you're using your voice, and you're even bending some words, which that's very creative. However, it is not teaching you your Black literary tradition. It is not teaching you the history of Black resistance in this country. It is also not teaching you to learn the law so that you could get your political prisoners out of jail. This is Black August, so some of our best and brightest are still behind bars. And brothers are just getting out of jail after serving 60 years. Many of you lovely people, you ain't even 30. And if you are 30, you just early 30s. You might even be 40. But imagine doing 60 years in prison. Rochelle McGee just got out of jail. He did 60 years. You see? H. Rap Brown, he's now Imam Jalil Alamin. He's in jail now and shouldn't be. He's there on trumped up charges. He's a political prisoner. So what this country did then was to remove some of our best and brightest. I'm sure even tangentially, many of you know about the saga of Huey Newton. I mean, they hounded Huey right up to his death. Okay, Bobby is still with us, all praise due, right? But there's no Black political figures with prestige that help a Bobby Seale. He's making it the best way he can, taking care of his family. None of the Black bourgeoisie reached out to Bobby. All right. Now, check this out. Hollywood did reach out to Bobby, okay, decades ago, but they wanted him to play an informer. They wanted to do a film. And his wife was all happy. I was all happy too. We probably gonna get some money. All right, because we living in a capitalist society. Well, when we saw the script, Bobby couldn't do that. And for a minute, his wife was like, "Look, baby, look, you gonna do this because we got to pay the rent." But even she stepped back and said, "Wait a minute, God damn!" You could see what they were doing. So Bobby, in his good sense, he didn't take that kind of a film, okay, because he knew he was not going to present himself in that kind of an image for the young generation. So you see,
Yeah.
what we're doing now is bringing it back. Like Neff talks about cycles of time. We're bringing it back to where it needs to be, but it's going back to go forward, because
Stand
you could
closer.
be the bravest panther in the world or just the bravest person in the world, but we all Black people need healing, and the suicide rate for young Black men is going up. I don't know what the actual stats are, but I just read that from a bunch of things that I was reading. So Black men are killing themselves more than they ever have before
I
right
f-
now.
I imagine, I'm not certain of any statistics or anything, that people are killing themselves more now than they were before.
And by the way, you are right. Even white elderly people are killing themselves more than they ever have before. Okay, so
And
you're
this
absolutely
Yeah,
correct.
this is a fundamental disconnect. 'Cause when we talk about that death culture, when we talk about being anti-nature, we're talking about that. That's exactly what we're talking about, because on the opposite side of that is life. on the opposite side of that is what we're speaking about, this connection. And the healing element is really significant, but we're going to touch on that next Tuesday. So I'm not going to go deep into the
Oh,
healing right now.
okay. All right.
But for in terms of nature, though, nature is the most healing thing. First of all, it's just like the cognitive benefits of interacting with nature is all scientifically proven. You just go out and sit under a tree and for a moment and you'll feel the healing of nature, right? The science around just literally taking off your shoes and earthing yourself and putting your
That's
feet
right.
on the soil, how healing that is. So what I wanted to speak on, though, because essentially pillar 2 is really declaring that nature is the key to spiritual freedom, right? Which is also physical as well. So again, when we're dealing with it from an African worldview, we're dealing with it holistically. So the physical is spiritual, right? Because I also see that some people kind of get escapey right now with this whole new age movement. And it's like, oh, the spirituality is a way to escape the physical reality. But no, we have to contend with the material conditions of the world and the spiritual conditions that create that simultaneously, right? But if we start from the top, then we affect the physical world as well. But the other thing that we say is we're returning to our natural systems and using original nature as a model, standard, and connecting point. So I think it's very important for us to be able to know how to orient ourselves with values that are rooted in nature. And ultimately, you would have to value nature, because I think what you were speaking on, what I was gathering from it was really the issue is our values have been corrupted.
Yeah.
And we don't value the same things, right? We'll value the things that we're seeing on these people that you said that are being projected onto us, the black bourgeois, so to say. So now people want, like, they're not going to go against the system if they want to be a part of it, right? And it's very polarized here, and in most countries in Africa, I feel it's very polarized, because just like the wealth disparity is very intense, so you can just connect to it more directly than you can in the divided states. Because I see it here as well. I'm just like, I see how the people they tolerate the system as it stands, like literally living off of $2 a day, because they want to have that car. They want to have that house, and like they're just aspiring to the things that they now value that are material. And I think that that's something that we have to deal with. Now, that doesn't mean we don't value the material world, but we can't value the material world above truth. We can't value the material conditions above our health, right? So these are the things we're talking about when we talk about rooting ourselves in nature. Should we be valuing money over health? Right. So these are the things that I feel like we do have to examine. And it's interesting. I did see a comment here from Brother Wale. Welcome. It says, in nature, 1+1 rarely equals 2. Nature is synergistic. And then we also had a comment here from Danny Ghazi. Yeah, it's painful to see the personality archetypes now created from the influx of those influences. And she also said, and it's created such a willingness to abandon each other too.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to speak on that, Mama Regina?
Well, because you and I both have agreed on the individualistic nature of America. I mean, America was built on that kind of individualism. They created their own individual heroes, right? Davy Crockett and George Washington never told a lie. Well, if you ask the Native Americans, they used to call old George. Now, I can't speak their language, but it translated into the man who burns down towns. That's what the Native Americans thought of the great hero George Washington, because his mission was to kill as many of them as possible, to make the land for whites to come over here and to become homesteaders. They just stole the land from the Native Americans and then gave it to their white brethren, okay, who had developed their kind of a mentality. not necessarily group oriented, unless it was to kill other natives or to enslave Black people, but a kind of individualism that's unhealthy. We must live in community. That's even why earlier when I introduced myself, I brought up that wonderful little Black community that I lived in that I didn't even realize it was a segregated, poor Black community. Because by the way, if my grandmother had to go somewhere, then I could eat with my aunt who lived right around the corner. Or if she was at work or something, I could go to Miss Liggins' house who was right next door. All of this is within that same Black community. If people didn't ran out of bread or sugar or whatever, they would come and, I need some bread, and they would get it. I'm talking about the 1950s and the early 60s right here in America. Today, many people don't even really know their neighbors. All right? I mean, children, we used to just play in the street during the summer from sunlight to sundown, except when we had to take a nap. Well, children today, right? They have to duck bullets. So we're living in a time that has not progressed in a way that is helpful to future generations. And see, this is the kind of thing, too, that Bobby and Huey wanted to attack and overturn, because they were even talking about land, okay, when they were putting together the 10-point platform and program, which, Neff, as you said, you base part of your program on their concepts. That's evolution. But you see, people are so hung up in this artificial world. Now, what we're doing right now is wonderful. Okay. You and I are in two different geographical spaces, and we can talk. And other people watching and listening to us can even add their comments. This is when technology is good. Technology is great when that brother in Alabama, Montgomery, was explaining to the white folks that they could not dock there. All right, they had to move their boat. Now, thank goodness people were videotaping. That's when technology really works. However, at the same time, if our people, and I've seen them, are on these artificial systems a lot, that's unhealthy. That's unhealthy because they learn how not to deal with people in the flesh. They learn how not to really have a good conversation, you know, with another person. All right. Sisters will learn, well, I don't really need a man. Well, what the fuck, excuse me. What do you really need then? I mean, really? Okay. Because a lot of sisters are saying that, well, I can just, have a baby. And no, that's not. So this individualism combined with this technology has broken up the Black family, which means it has broken up the Black community. And during the 60s, when we said hello, how you doing? We said nation time. Nation time. So it was always on our mind. That kind of unity has disappeared. The kinds of arguments and mess that people tell me, because I'm not on that much social media, tell me that people are arguing about, it's just ridiculous when we should be building, not arguing against each other. But it also shows that we don't really know who our true enemy is like we once did.
What's really interesting, one of the things that came up for me right now.
I can't hear you now.
Can you hear me?
I do, yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that came up for me as you were
But
speaking,
you're very low.
is it still low?
It's low. It's lower than it was before.
Okay. Is whoever's here in the chat with us, can you just let me know if you can hear me clearly? And Mama Regina, does it sound better now? I guess I
Yes,
can
it's
just.
better now. Okay.
Okay. So the thing that I was just thinking about was a conversation that I had with Mama Joy. So I think I mentioned her in one of the other episodes we had, Dr. Joy Hart, another one of my elders. And Mama Joy, I was talking to her about situation here because I was planning to kill a goat. And we were talking about sacrifice. And she was telling me a story about when she went to Kenya and they were going to do a ritual sacrifice of a chicken. And she was explaining the situation to me, and then I guess the guy, the elder who was doing the ceremony, was like weird, like he didn't understand how she's never sacrificed a chicken before or never did a sacrifice before. And she's like, yeah, she's like, no, where I'm from, it's like you only see the chickens in the supermarket in the plastic, right? And he goes, oh, okay. He was like, you guys don't do sacrifices. That's why you sacrifice your children, because sacrifices must be made. And when she told me that, it was one of those things that I got like the truth bumps all over me because I felt, yeah, because we're so disconnected from the cycles of nature, right? Because it's not about evolution, it's not going that way, it's about revolution. So things do have to die and come back around, because also our fear of death and our disconnect from the nature of death is also part of the problem, because again, it has to be in equilibrium. So with the technology, with anything that's created by Set, by the gravity, by the Yorugu, by the European, whatever we want to call that energy, right? That we're saying is like, literally the energy of death and decay. When we look at our ancestral interpretation of the energy and the mythologies that we had, what we call the European is the embodiment of Set or Setesh. And it's interesting because that's also where Satan comes from, right? The devil energy. And it's interesting because, Elijah Muhammad, that was like such a big thing. Like the controversial thing was, Malcolm X saying that, they're devils, and there was a reason for that. Obviously it didn't have like the same, sophistication that our ancestral mythology has, but I want to bring us there because that nuance is important, because we have to recognize that energy exists within us. It is the gravity. It's what's considered to be our lower self. Now, you need your lower self, which we also call the ego. You need it to survive. And it's the same way that we say, like when we say that Africa is the mother of the cradle of humanity, then that means that the European is our children, essentially. So if they are the children of Africa, then that means that nature of the cold, of the ice, because we are the stewards and the original people of the planet, then that's also part of our nature. It's not something that we should villainize. It's something that we need to put in its proper place. So in the mythology, you have the balance of Set and Heru. Heru is the one who avenges his father and goes to battle with his uncle Set in order to take back the throne. Now, I don't know if I had talked about this in one of our previous episodes, so I don't want to be redundant in expressing the mythology, because I feel like I express it all the time because it's so fundamental to everything. It's literally the war that's going on inside of us, of our higher and lower self. But essentially, you can't defeat your ego and destroy it, because you need it to survive. So with the technology, we have to find a way to utilize it the way we are. But the way I like to describe it to people is call a gun a gun. Don't come and tell me that gun is a tool when it's a weapon. And I think that that's the description that most people have for social media and the technology, the digital technology, right? Because we also have to recognize that technology is, first of all, the definition of technology is the application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes, especially in industry. So technology is not limited. Like sometimes people use the word technology and they're immediately thinking of the digital technology, synthetic technology, artificial technology. And nature is the original technology. Everything that they create is built on our nature. Literally, the internet is built on our neurological system. all of the things that are created are literally designed after our makeup, our nature, the nature of the planet. So why not look to the source for the actual technological advancement? Why would you devolve into the thing that is created from it
Mhm.
as the pinnacle of technology, and then see that as some type of tool that we have to use? And I think it's important to know, like, if you have a bomb, you want to know it's a bomb. Like, you can't try to narrate it in a different way, otherwise you lose your power within the dynamic. And I feel like if we could just look at social media and say, okay, this is a weapon, because that's what it was designed for, and then I'm gonna go ahead and it's a gun, I'm gonna shoot it. It's not a knife. A knife is more, dynamic. You could do other things. You can cut knots. You can do all kinds of things with the knife, right? It is a tool and a weapon. So
Right.
I just think we need to be clear, like, shoot to kill. We're going to use the technology. We need to be aware of what we're using it for, but that requires us to have that political consciousness. And a lot of us don't have that political consciousness. So I
That's
think
right.
we need to do a lot of work around political education.
Yep.
For Tehuti Ma'at, we call it holistic education, because we can't just deal with the political. We also have to deal with the economic education, and we have to deal with that cultural, spiritual education as well. So if we have it holistically, that would be great. But I think the one that people struggle with the most becomes the political, because it requires a lot of courage. Because when you if you're gonna go against the established order or disorder, the established imperialist order on the planet, that literally, like you said, has people locked, has had our brothers locked and sisters locked up for the past 60 years, others in exile.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, you better be ready for what that means. So it does
Mm-hmm.
take a lot of courage to speak the truth in that context. So yeah, you can't be afraid of death. You have to really be in line with nature. You have to recognize that death is for rebirth. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Mama Regina, because I really think this would be a great time to talk about what is the nature or the original perspective that we had on nature as African people before colonialism, before imperialism, and the way that we interact with nature now.
Well, I will say this. One of my books, in fact, I'll hold it up. Poetry in the Black Panther Party from Ancestral Memory, Morphogenetic Fields to Hip Hop. Morphogenetic Fields is ancestral memory. That's what I argue in this book, looking at the poetry that Huey produced, Bobby, and other Panther leaders at the time. In our original African space, now, of course, when somebody leaves the earth that you're close to, of course you're going to be sad. Of course you're going to cry. Of course you're going to mourn the loss of that physical being. But our original ancestors, they did not believe that these people were actually like gone forever. You know, they believed that those who were deceased went to the ancestral realm. And they also believed that they could communicate with those who are physically not there. In many African cultures, they would put down food for their deceased loved one daily or every other day. You know, they would put down their favorite drink in a certain part of the house to welcome that spirit back so that they could communicate with that spirit. Now, the original Europeans that found this out about African cultures, they felt that was, silly or foolish but science today, the morphogenetic field, that comes straight out of Einstein. That comes out of other European scientists that through their advanced instruments have measured and can see the energies that are all around the earth. Now, they can't explain them, because it comes to a point, you split a cell, you split a cell, you split a cell, and then there's nothing. There's like nothing, like everything, it just disappears. But we are made up of cells, 50 trillion of them. Okay. And what is that's within the spaces between cells? That's energy. Okay. And there's energy all around us, okay, that we cannot see, but it is there. The atomic bomb, atom, the atomic bomb. This is what they did with these kinds of energies that are invisible to the naked eye. I'm talking
Yeah,
about European scientists now.
yeah. And I
Just,
always tell people that, yeah, you can't see the Wi-Fi and you know it's
you
there,
got it.
right?
That's
Because really
perfect.
it was beyond belief. We know. We
That's
know
right.
that the energy is there. We know that we're operating in an eternal paradigm. We
Mm-hmm.
know that even time is not linear, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we know in our healed state. Now, as we've been indoctrinated and as we're operating, and the majority of people don't have that awareness. They have to be reminded of that truth and taught. So it is a significant disconnect from the totality of our connection, because we are now believing more in the Wi-Fi, which is created on a synthetic grid that, as I said, is built on a whole system of exploitation, not only of the earth, but of literal people. So it's very significant to think about that. The thing I wanted to connect us back to, and I did see a couple of comments here as well that I just want to acknowledge. I know that Danny had said something about single mothers being isolated, a lot of young mothers, and that was to what you were speaking on earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's like people always talking about the colonizer, but there's an inner colonizer in a lot of people in the way that they interact in their relationships in nature. Yeah, and I
That's
think
right.
that that's also about the accountability. Is it worth acknowledging the politics happening now? Now, I would love to know what politics you're referring to, because, in my opinion, everything is political. I think everything has that political, economic, and cultural aspect. And I really base that off of, because part of our holistic symmetry ideology and methodology is built off of Dr. Leonard Jeffries' pyramid analysis, because Dr. Jeffries' pyramid analysis gives us an African centered perspective for critical analysis and analytical thinking. So it's not linear. So we look at those 3 points of reference: the cultural, the economic, and the political.
That's
And
right.
that every single thing has cultural, economic, and political
That's
ramifications.
right. Excellent.
So,
Excellent. Let
yeah,
me
I
let
think.
me yeah, I want to share this too, Neff, because it falls right into the politics, the land. This is, and plus I want people to know this is number 10 of Bobby and Huey's 10-point platform uh, and principles. And I have noticed that on the internet, they've clipped this. You don't get the full paragraph that those two brothers within 2 days stayed up all night to put together. You don't get this. You just get one sentence. This is number 10. We
Mhm.
want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. And as our major political objective, a United Nations supervised plebiscite to be held throughout the Black colony, in which only Black colonial subjects will be allowed to participate for the purpose of determining the will of Black people as to their national destiny. So, even though this is a new era, a new time, an expansion of artificiality, back in the 60s, these brothers were talking about just about everything that we're talking about now. Only organizations like Nefs, like Tehuti Ma'at, has evolved it. But if we want
Revolved
land, say that again. Say it again.
it. Revolved it.
Revolved it. Okay. We want land. What are you going to do with land? You're going to build on it. You're going to grow things. All right. And I'll skip to and education. Do you know that it was the Panthers that started Black Studies? They say other people start. It was Huey and Bobby and others at Merritt College. So if you've ever taken a Black Studies course, I want you to say thank you, Huey and Bobby, because they are the ones that created it and imposed it on a college, Merritt College in Oakland, California. They did that in 65.
What you read is so heavy and so important that I need you to run to I need us to go back to that
Okay.
because I need to make sure that our listening audience, anyone who is listening, knows what a plebiscite is. Can you let them know? Because that is ultimately really the main political act that we need to move forward, to move the ball forward.
Right. What a plebiscite is it's really a group of elected Black people from every community in this country to come together like a United Nations does. It's a like it would be a part of something like a United Nations, but it would be just for the Black colony. It would be just for Black people to determine their own destiny.
And
So
then
go
I'm
ahead, dear.
I'm just gonna keep I want us to keep boiling it down to make sure people are really crystal clear on the political lens that we have to look at the world through. Why are we referring to ourselves as a Black colony? Because people need to recognize that we are African people colonized in what we call America, right? So can you speak
That's
on
right.
that?
Yeah, because what they were trying to do, Eldridge Cleaver was a part of this as well, because he wrote about it even more than Huey and Bobby did. Because there were colonies in Africa, there was always that Malcolm X movement to create what was going on in Africa to the so-called Negro. That's what Malcolm used to call us, before we moved to African American. So Eldridge Cleaver in particular talked about the Black people in America as a colonized people. So we were like a nation within a nation, but we were ruled over by whites. We didn't have anything that was independent to us or autonomous to us as a people. And so this plebiscite was to to condense the best of us, chosen by the various communities, or I won't call them colonies, by the various communities, Black communities in the United States. Each community would choose who its leader should be to enter into this plebiscite and the people there would make decisions that were for the betterment of each of their sections within the United States. I keep comparing it to the UN because people have a vague idea of what the UN is. And they were modeling what they wanted to see as an intellectual unit, like a UN, but one for Black people, because we were, in fact, a colonized people. It was more pronounced on the continent. I mean, the French, which are being thrown out of Burkina Faso as I speak, which I love, right
And
on. But
Niger and
yeah, hey, Niger, come on now. Don't get me started. But
Mali and
anyway, yeah, their colonization was very obvious. Ours was not, because America was supposed to be built on the democratic principles, yada yada yada, boom. But those principles did not apply to Black people. So this
I
is
think I'm
why the
leader.
Panther leader said that we were, a nation within a nation, and that we were a colony of white America.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I learned about the plebiscite as I was working with the December 12th movement back in Brooklyn, um, over at Sister's Place, 456 Nostrand Avenue. Great elders to connect with in the movement. They've been doing really powerful work since the 80s, and they're very active in the United Nations. They usually represent the Black masses at the UN. And, I think it's important for us to recognize that the UN is the organized body of global European imperialism.
Absolutely.
Regardless of that representation of, or the people who are sitting at the tables, they're mostly people, what we would call puppet presidents, puppet.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's significant that you mentioned what's happening in Africa right now, because it's a very significant
Yes.
revolutionary shift that's happening.
Yes.
The power
Right
dynamic
now.
has,
Yes.
yes, it's very exciting. So for those who don't know, there was recently a coup d'etat in Niger, and the puppet president that was in place there has been removed, and now there is a militant or military government in place. And the French and also the other organizations that have been created to control African people, like ECOWAS, which is like organizations of different African nations, are
Yeah.
now threatening to invade if they don't put the puppet president back in place. However, we
That's
have
right.
this beautiful display of unity that I don't think we have seen yet, as minor as it may seem. The fact that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea are all saying, if you step foot
Yep.
in Niger, then you're also declaring war on our nations as well, because they are also have a militant um, government in place. And I find that to be very significant, that we have African leaders that are resisting, some very young. The president of Burkina Faso is pretty young,
Yeah,
and
he's
the very,
35. And have you seen him? He
yeah.
is drop dead gorgeous. That brother excited me more than I can explain. Continue, Neff.
Yeah, I think
You
it's
know,
just great to
aesthetics
see
mean
that
something.
act
That
of,
brother's fine.
yeah, I think it's the strength, because you can see that he's a warrior spirit, the fact that, he takes that militant posture, but also I love that they're not wearing suits. They're literally in fatigues. Like, they're not playing.
Yes.
They're not playing.
Yes.
And that's the problem right now, is a lot of us are not really, we're playing. As Tanu would say, we're playing and we're not even having fun. So we really need to get more serious about it. And I always say, when I say serious, I'm talking about that star we talked about, right? Our origin, our spiritual sun, because we have to be oriented to the sun, right? And if we're not oriented to this creative force, then we're not in alignment with our nature. And that means we may not be serving our own interests. So I think the sun is one of the key elements in nature to direct ourselves to, but also, speaking of the power of that militancy, but also that active masculine energy that's like in posture and in position to protect, it's very powerful. That is what they're afraid of. You referenced that
That's
earlier
right.
in the beginning of the
That's right.
stream. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because a lot of the divine masculine elements that we have ancestrally are very, very, very powerful for us to orient ourselves into. It's significant that ancestrally we called the earth Geb, and Geb was seen
Ah,
as a masculine force, not a
that's right.
feminine force.
That's
Right
right.
now, we're taught Mother
It's true.
Nature,
Mother
Mother
Nature.
Earth, right? And then they tell people that God is in heaven, the masculine is in heaven. But ancestrally, as I said before, in the previous episode when we did the balance of the sexes, all of the forces of nature, right, in our sacred spiritual science, have complementary energy. So there's always going to be an
Mhm.
active and a receptive. There's always a masculine and a feminine expression. So the complement, right, the partner, the wife of Geb is Nut. Nut is the cosmos. She is the womb, right? And the earth is in the womb of darkness, right? Because that masculine energy is birthed through the womb. So it's not one is higher and one is lower, one is above and one is below. It's more so, which is the law of correspondence, as above, so below. Beautiful way for us to also orient ourselves in nature as well, right? Looking at what happens above also happens below. So when we see what happens in the stars, that's why we created these mythologies, because they are expressed on the earth, right? But the reason why we have to flip things back around right side up, right? Even look at my earrings, right? Africa is right side up here. We're usually shown Africa upside down. But our orientation for Africa was based on the flow of the Hapi, the river
Ah,
that we know today
yeah.
as the Nile. It flowed from south to north, right? So those are significant things. When things are inverted, it's very, very significant. So we have to flip things back around so we're right side up. The earth was depicted as a masculine. Now, as a farmer, I love to explain this to people, because when you connect with nature and when you connect with the soil, when you connect with the earth, you do recognize this masculinity. Now, everything has masculine and feminine, even the earth. Just like we, even though I'm a woman, I have a womb, but I also have masculine energy in me. Likewise, with our male counterparts, they also have feminine energy. But the dominant energy is based on the nature of the material expression of the energy. So the
Mhm.
earth, we see it erecting trees and all kinds of
Damn.
vegetation. They come out of
Whoa.
the earth, right? They're active. They literally are erect. So literally, when you see the depictions of Geb, if you were to Google it, Geb, if you look at the depictions of Geb, Geb always has an erection, right? Because this was seen as the vitality and the virality of life. But also, it's the great green. Now, Asar, because I mentioned Set before. So let's go back to that original mythology. Now, in the mythology of Aust and Asar, when Set kills Asar and chops his body up into 14 pieces, Asar is killed, right? So he goes into the underworld. He is dead. He transitions. Now, that's seen as Asar as the great black, because he has to go into the underworld and come through that transformed. After Nebutet and Ost put the pieces of the body back together, the 13 colonies that were divided in Berlin Conference put those pieces back together. She has to fashion his henenum, right? His phallus, his erection, because the fish in the Nile, in the Hapi, swallows it. So she has to fashion one, does this ritual, and he resurrects, impregnates her, and that's how she gives birth to Heru, the son who goes and avenges his father's death. And again, as I said, he doesn't kill his uncle, because we still
That's
need the
right.
ego, right? We still
Right.
need that
Right.
mechanism, because we have to
Right.
learn self-preservation. So within that, I want to go back to Asar's death. Now, when Asar's in the underworld, he is considered the great black, right? Because he's now in the womb of the astral realm, right? Anytime we go into transition, we go into the womb, right? Just like when the baby is in the womb, it then comes through the birthing canal, right? So that's the constant cycle. When we go to sleep at night, right, we go into what we call the duat, the underworld, right? So that's just the subconscious realm, right? It's the astral realm. So that blackness, that darkness was also symbolic of Geb, because when we're talking about divine masculine energies, they're layered, right? So you have that aspect of nature that is the earth, is the soil. And that's what Asar is representing when he's seen as the great black, right? This divine masculine energy as blackness. Now, why? Because black soil, the darker the soil it is, the more fertile it is, right? And why did he go into the underworld? Because he had to learn about death and decay. That's what his brother represented that killed him. He was the principle of death and decay. Asar is the principle of life and regeneration, right? So he has to learn about death and decay. Why? What is that? Because when you sow a seed into the soil, it goes into that blackness, and what happens? It starts to decay. It decays, that's the death process, and then it sprouts, it erects back out. That is the resurrection. This is what we're talking about. It's science. It's not this, oh, these are gods and goddesses that we worship, and these are things that happen. Like, it's look at the symbolism of what it represents. A
Mhm.
SAR represents the vegetation, the vitality of the earth, the regenerative property of the earth, the fact that you sow the seed, it dies and resurrects into green vegetation, right? So that's what it actually symbolizes. So that to me is very significant, because there's a proper position that we have to have for masculine energy because of what it represents and what it asserts into the world, right? I always like to quote Frederick Douglass: power concedes nothing without demand. It never has and it never will.
Never
The
will.
feminine energy is receptive. The masculine energy is active. Now, I have that active energy right now, but I want to be able to operate in my divine feminine and be able to intuit and receive and channel and create. So we need to have the masculine operating in its ability to assert itself. That's that war element, right? So that doesn't mean that the women can't be in the war, but what's the wisest position to have the woman in is to be in alignment with her nature, right? So it's not saying that it's like, oh, women have to be in the kitchen and cooking and raising the kids. It's just to look at the original nature as our model, because that's what we're talking about today. That becomes a model. But again, everything within equilibrium, just like we have to find ways that we still use the technology, because anytime we go anti and we go fully against something, we lose our power. We lose our power because now we're just trying to be anti. We have to be against it. And you have to know when it's appropriate to go back to that. If when it's appropriate to kill, hey, we're talking about war. We're talking about revolution. So yeah, there's a space for death. If you are all pro-life, then that means you can't kill, right? So it's a matter of being able to synthesize what's appropriate and not take one particular position, because that's what Ma'at is. Ma'at is actually synthesis of the entire spectrum because she is whole, right? So I think that that is a great note for us to complete today's cipher on. Are there any other things that you want to express in closing, Mama Regina?
No, not really. First of all, I'm very honored to be in this space to hear you explain and amplify the spirituality, mythology in ancient Kemet. That what you said about Geb, and I've looked at that picture many, many times. Your explanation of Geb being Earth, and he's has a full erection. He's beneath Newt. You know, your examination of that very important image for us on this earth because we're on Geb. I had no idea that the seed died when you planted the seed in the dirt. To me, I thought you plant a seed, it's going to resurrect. Well, if it resurrects, that was that. Anyway, I didn't see it as clearly as you explained it tonight. You put the seed in the earth and something will grow. So I think that is incredibly important, and for us to start thinking that way because it's ours. What you explained is our oldest or one of our oldest mythological, if you will, concepts. And it is that kind of going back to come forward that we as a people need. Because right now, and this is a feeling that I have, truly, from looking at events in Africa and in America, and even particularly what recently happened in Montgomery. Because for young people who really don't know or didn't know about a Huey or Bobby or Malcolm, well, they kind of know Malcolm, but really, just superficially, the youth who really don't have that kind of historical background, that Montgomery event kicked off a lot. I've seen people have sent me, videos where youngsters are like, yeah, we tired of that. We couldn't be there for Trayvon. We couldn't be there for Mike Brown. They're bringing it. I'm like, okay. Then they doing things with the chair, which, I mean, that's hysterical. I mean, people are making songs about this. And as I mentioned earlier, it happened in Black August. So that is now a part of Black August history with the Haitian Rebellion, with Nat Turner, with George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson, and all the other events that relate to us, revolutionary events during August. This is a contemporary one that I think has the ability to like wake up or expand the minds, in particularly of the youth who really don't have that kind of historical foundation which they need to have. And see, when I talk about a historical foundation, I'm not even talking about how far back you go, Neff. That's why it's important, I think, to bring them both together as you and I are doing on these Tuesday evenings.
Yes, it's very important. I'm sorry, you going in on that just made me want to say a couple things because there's a part of me, like as much as I've embraced that, there's a part of me that is critical of the fact that we create these events, because I think Kwame Ture said it best, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, for those who are not familiar with Kwame Ture. But he always made that distinction between mobilization and organization. And we really have to move from having these events into having actual organization.
You're
And
and you're absolutely correct. But is deaf, dumb, and blind as I find young people to be,
yes,
their
I know
morals
that's why
so. Do
I
you know
had
what
to
I'm saying?
like, I
But
know
go
exactly
ahead.
what you mean, and I think it was very significant. The thing that really made me embrace it was someone had put a clip up of Malcolm X being interviewed, and he was saying there's going to be one day when somebody does something to one black man and other black men are going to respond. And it was just like, oh wow, like it took us this
There it
long to
is.
even just to get to that step.
That's just to
No,
get to
so I'm
there.
just like, all right, it actually is a milestone. I received that, but who do we have ways to go?
Yes, we
Let's
do.
get going.
We do.
That's all. That's all I'm gonna say to that. But also, in closing, I do want to lift the two ancestors that are our pillars for nature, which are Hattie Carthan and Dr. Sheikh Enta Diop. So I'll just leave two resources just as breadcrumbs for people to research and connect with these ancestors more deeply. Dr. Sheikh Enta Diop is a brilliant, brilliant scholar, um, anthropologist, and just beloved. What were you saying?
Oh, he's a physicist as well.
Physicist. So he's an
Yeah.
author. Recommend that people research who he is, his biography, but also his books. Two that I can recommend off the top is The African Origins of Civilization, Myth or Reality, since some people are still questioning that part. And also Civilization or Barbarism is also a great book of Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop. He is a Senegalese born um, man, and yeah, there's just a lot that you can learn about Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, and that'll be clear for you why he is our pillar of nature. And then also, he also connects the language, the ancient language, the Medu Neter, to Wolof, which is one of the current
Yes.
dialects in Senegal. And Hattie Carthan is an environmental activist based in Brooklyn, New York. She is actually the relative of our co-founder for Tehuti Ma'at. But why Hattie Carthan is significant is because she did on the ground activism in terms of protecting nature in the city. And I think that I like to be really grounded in the fact that everybody's not going to be able to get out on land. I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I have to have land, to be on land, ancestral land at that. but not everybody has that opportunity. So we created organic food for the people, Tehuti Ma'at Community Garden, as a model to show people that they could organize communities, right? Because when we go back to the plebiscite, right, the communities have to be organized. Our hoods are not communities. So we have to create communities. And the way that we do that is on land. So being able to convert any vacant lot, any dilapidated land, anybody's yard into a farm, into a haven where you can gather people and do events and gatherings and rituals and ceremonies and grow food and connect people is very, very important. And Hattie Carthen's legacy, you know, she saved the last magnolia tree. She did a lot of activism around, really, she was the foundation of the current, you know, models that we have right now, especially in New York, for, you know, urban gardening and green spaces, because she fought for that and said that it was important for us to have that. We can't just go out ripping out all the trees. We need the trees. We literally need the trees to breathe, right? So that work was very significant at a point when, you know, we were really deeply settling into these cities and forgetting about nature and the importance of having nature even in the concrete jungle. So those are two aspects of nature and ecosystem restoration that are significant. There were a lot of things we didn't touch on today. Again, this was just brief. But if you join the Tehuti Ma'at militia, I highly recommend that you go into the archives and you watch our countering chemical warfare presentation. I did a very, very powerful 2-part presentation on countering chemical warfare, and we really go into the narratives around global warming, around reducing the carbon footprint, and how these are specifically attacking us. So I want to thank everyone who is here and present. I also want to go ahead and acknowledge this final comment from Danny Ghazi, because I actually think this is very significant, what you said about the LGBTQ symbol being the chakras inverted. Again, imbalance. Now, what I do want to say about the chakras, which in Medu Neter, right, because chakras is Sanskrit, what the African origins of that would be are the aritu, right? So the aritu are meant to be cycled, right? Our energy centers are meant to be cycled. It's not meant to be linear, just bottom up or top down, right? So the fact that it's upside down as well is problematic. But really, I want us to recognize that it's really supposed to be cyclical. We're supposed to be moving the energy around. So I just want to thank everybody for being present. I don't know, are you still here with us, Mama Regina? I know Mama Regina had to go, but I want to thank you all for your presence. And I hope to see you next Tuesday at 6:00 Eastern time. And we'll be touching on pillar 3, which is healing, and having a discussion about that based on all of the many things happening in the world right now. So also, if you want to be present live, then you can be part of curating that conversation with your questions and comments. And I just want to thank everybody who stuck through. Thank you, Brother Wale and Jadorian. We appreciate you, Danny, Brother Mujasi. Have a beautiful night, and we'll see you next strong. Power.